You are listening to Fantha Tracks.
Because of the following special program, Wonder Woman and the Incredible Hulk will not be presented this evening.
Your Star Wars news in a single file. This is Making Tracks. Here are your hosts, Mark Newbold and Mark Mulcaster.
That's not true. That's impossible.
Hello and welcome to episode 138 of Making Tracks, brought to you by those fine folk over at fanfortracks.com. My name's Mark, I'm one of your co-hosts, and this week, as always, I'm joined by our international travelling man of mystery, and also the Star Wars Celebration podcast host. It's Mark Newbold. Mark, how you doing, buddy?
Oh, very well, mate. I'm very well. How are you?
I'm good. I'm very well. It's a lovely weekend. I had a fun day trooping yesterday at Rickmansworth, and can't complain. Counting down the days to celebration. How about yourself?
Same. Yeah, you sound very bright and bubbly. I like that because I'm still struggling with this post-COVID cough business.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm fine. I'm good. Plans are going well for the trip. I think we're pretty much there in terms of what we need to do and what we need to take and everything else. And it's been a monster busy week with Star Wars. Obviously, Kenobi's just around the corner, so we've got. Well, we'll go through the latest Kenobi news, obviously, but there's been interviews and there's been all sorts of reveals and little clips dropping, so that's been great fun. So yeah, a busy Star Wars week, as always.
Excellent. And has your collection expanded this week?
I think I ordered it last week, and I might have even mentioned it. I've gone on this weird little run of collecting the old episode 1 key rings. The little metal key rings. Mm-hmm. So I had 3 more come this week. So I had Anakin, but he's on the proper little sort of display dangler thing. Not loose like the other ones. So I've got Anakin, Battle Droid, and Obi-Wan. I think it's Obi-Wan. And I think the only one I'm looking for now is Queen Amidala, I think. So I need to do a bit of research. But yeah, that's been fun. What about yourself?
To be honest, not a huge amount. Similarly to you, and you know me kind of recollecting some of the mid-90s kind of stuff. Yeah. I picked up a Wedge Antilles, I guess it's 12-inch, I think 12-inch kind of plastic figure, which is from Applause. So they did a fairly kind of extensive range around the kind of Shadows of the Empire kind of time, and they did most of the original trilogy characters, but they also did a few kind of like random ones, and Wedge is probably, could be considered one of those. So a bit like the key rings are not massively expensive and not, hugely in demand or, collectible. So it's not like a big kind of deal when you get them, but they are nice to have because I had some of them as some of the first things I think I ever brought probably. Yeah. And some of them probably got a little bit trashed. So yeah, it's time to kind of rebuy them and get them on a shelf somewhere.
Yeah, don't you find though little things like that on the sort of bigger scale you'd think it's just kind of part of the collection. It's nothing too special. But when you get into it and actually sort of start bringing them back out and looking at them, like I've been changing the room around a lot. Yeah, not done so much this week, but it's just sort of been refining this week. But the last few weeks I've been pulling things out. I forgot I got that. And they're all little fiddly farty things that just really light me up. Are you a bit like that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, especially with stuff that you kind of forget about because you're like, oh my God, yeah, I have got that. And that's really nice because one, it means you don't rebuy it, of course, but also there's normally a memory connected somewhere to it.
We've got loads to get through today. We're going to talk a bit about Kenobi. There's been some interviews with some of the primary people involved. We've got 3 listeners' questions again, which I'm really chuffed about because I do like our listeners' questions because we can go off on our little random road trips of nonsense and talk about all sorts of stuff. And we've also got 2 interviews from the fantastic Star Wars Fan Fun Day in Blackburn back at the start of the month. We've got Sean Crawford and we've got Tim Dry. So both of those guys talking about their experiences in Jabba's Palace on Return of the Jedi. So looking forward to that. Let's start with Ewan McGregor, the man of the moment, talking in the Obi-Wan Kenobi Global Press Conference. He was discussing all sorts of stuff, but one thing that really jumped out to me was not only talking about getting back with the lightsaber, getting his hands, getting his body used to, moving like that again. There's a certain element of muscle memory, but, you don't remember everything. But there was a fantastic exchange with the host where he basically says he forgot how to do the accent. I mean, mind blown. How can Ewan McGregor forget to do the Obi-Wan Kenobi accent? I'll just read a little bit of the quote that he did. He says, so there was sort of a buzz about Obi-Wan walking back on stage. But then when we came to do the actual scenes with these other actors, this is when he's rehearsing and working opposite other actors to cast the thing. I was doing a sort of vague English accent, and it wasn't really Obi-Wan's voice at all. And I was like, oh dear, that's not very good. So, luckily we had months before we actually started shooting. So I went back and did some homework with Alec Guinness and what I'd done before in the original films. That just made me fall to bits.
I mean, I suppose, he had to kind of really channel Alec Guinness to begin with, didn't he, in the prequel trilogy? So I suppose but it's like anything, isn't it? As a musician, as a guitar and bass player, as you know, sometimes you'll play something and you'll be like, oh, that sounds really cool. And then you go away and you haven't played it for like a couple of weeks and you're like, how did that go? Mm-hmm. What was that? And then you kind of play exactly the same notes in exactly the same order, but for some reason they just don't sound quite right.
Yeah.
And so it's just one of those weird things. It's kind of it's a muscle memory aspect of it, and I suppose possibly it's maybe overthinking it as well. So yeah, I mean, I could kind of see it because it's been quite a while since he's had to channel his Obi-Wan-ness, shall we say. So
that's true.
And there's possibly one of those things that, again, after Revenge of the Sith, he probably thought, well, that's done now. I'll put that to the back of my mind and file that away because I'm probably never going to play Obi-Wan again.
So he says it at the end of the piece. He says playing him felt totally like he'd always been there, ready to come out at any minute, but just his voice needed a bit of work. So like you say, badly, I play the bass as well, and there is an element of muscle memory, and there is a moment when you think, I know this, but it's the intonation, isn't it? It's the subtleties.
Yeah.
And I suppose the voice, yeah, I guess, like you say, 2003, maybe some pickups later. I don't know if he did. I guess he did. The film comes out in 2005. Yeah, no Disney Plus, no anything else like that at the time. It didn't even exist 5 years ago. So yeah, you're right. Why would he even think he'd need to do the voice again?
Hi, this is Guy Henry, and you're listening to Fantha Tracks. Enjoy.
So, Kumail Nanjiani, he's one of the co-stars of Obi-Wan Kenobi. He's playing a character called Haja. He's from that neon-lit planet called Daiyu, and he was speaking to Entertainment Weekly on their Dagobah Dispatch podcast, and he was discussing the character, obviously his excitement of being part of the Star Wars galaxy, being involved in this show, very highly rates Ewan as an actor, as we all do. Mm-hmm. But there was a really fascinating piece, I thought, at the end when he's talking a little bit about the character. The characters, he describes him as kind of a con man character, and reveals, probably shouldn't have done, but reveals that, yes, his character probably survives this entire escapade, because the question is, whatever happens to your character, whether you live or die by the end of the show, once the character is introduced, they do tend to pop up elsewhere. And he says, well, it's all I've thought about. I'd love to play this character again, not just because of Star Wars, but it's a really, really fun character to play. I've never played a character like this before. It's a type of character we haven't exactly seen in Star Wars either, with a con man, And it just made me think of DJ in Last Jedi. He's kind of got that feel, hasn't he? What do you make of what he says? Because he's a great actor. He was fantastic in Eternals. He's been in loads of other stuff. So he's a great addition to the Star Wars Galaxy's cast of characters.
Absolutely. He's a fantastic addition. And like you said, Eternals, I think he was probably one of the better, stronger characters in that show. So, that's cool. But yeah, I mean, he's kind of right. I mean, we do have more kind of griftery type characters in the galaxy, as a whole, but obviously not necessarily. I think probably DJ is probably the closest you really get to an outright grifter like that. I mean, I suppose you could say possibly Solo's Lando Calrissian, maybe.
Yeah.
He's kind of got that vibe.
Yeah.
But yeah, and then obviously characters like Dr. Aphra really spring to mind.
Big time.
So hopefully, this will be an interesting character that I guess will be kind of like play, well with contrast against possibly how kind of maybe stiff Obi-Wan is a little bit, you think, to begin with. You think it's going to be this may be the guy that kind of really obviously probably picks out Obi-Wan as a mark to begin with, because he's maybe still he's kind of probably a little bit naive, I think, because obviously he's out in the world without any kind of Jedi backup, and he's there. He's obviously trying to find his way in the underworld to hide, and so therefore you think, well, somebody like Haja's going to come along and just going to go, right, I can take you for a ride, mate. And then obviously Obi-Wan is a bit wily, probably kind of cottons on pretty quick, but it's probably a good way to kind of introduce Obi-Wan, and I guess the viewer, into this post-Old Republic, early New Empire underworld era.
Yeah, that's a great point, actually, because last week we spoke about Ewan saying how Obi-Wan is rusty and his skills are not where they used to be. And so he, as a character, has to pick himself up and dust himself off, but also get up to speed with what Anakin / Darth Vader's doing, all these threats that are present. he's got to get back into it. And like you say, maybe because he is vulnerable to a degree, as much as Obi-Wan can be vulnerable, without that Jedi Order behind him, like you just said, all the backup that he would have had before, he's just been subsisting on his own, like Luke on Acto sort of thing. But
yeah.
And both sort of self-imposed to a degree, but for very different reasons. They both do it for a reason. Obi-Wan's willingly there to look after Luke and watch over him. And Luke, decades later, is willingly taking himself out of the equation, both living in solitude. But a character like Haja, is very much like you say, Lando's a great example, especially Solo era Lando. Here, what Kumail says, he can talk people into stuff. So that's a really fun character to play. I did a lot of research online on conmen and magicians, because magicians, let's face it, they're kind of like a conman, right? They're tricking people. That just makes me think of Jedi using Jedi mind tricks. So that's just an interesting spin on what he thinks of the character. So I looked up a lot of stuff about that to learn how to really play a character like this. And he loves the character. It's very clear he loves the character. I think Obi-Wan as a character at this point of time, and it depends on how far into the season we see Haja, because this is on Daiyu, and we presume that it all kicks off on Tatooine. How far around the galaxy we go, we don't know yet.
Just checking the old IMDb, there's not really a huge amount of information on there. And in fact, actually, the main series cast, for the most part, all confirmed for 6 episodes. And I'm just like, well, I don't think that's like you said, I don't think he's likely to just jump off to Daiyu straight away.
No.
Unless, of course, we meet him on Daiyu and then we flash back to Tatooine, for example, and there's that non-linear storytelling device going on again, something like that. Perhaps you have that cold opening where you kind of jump in with Obi-Wan and he's kind of in the middle of something, and then obviously we have to kind of play catch up,
like a Bond movie start or an Indiana Jones movie start.
Exactly, you got it precisely. Middle of a mission, and just and in this case with Obi-Wan, he's in, I don't know, he might even be kind of like sat behind a load of boxes, getting
stroking a loft cat.
Stroking a loft cut. I was going to say getting shot at by like 4 or 5 LOM, So it could be anything like that. I mean, I suppose, but hey, we have hardly any time to wait now. So whatever we say now, basically within a week, will probably be out of date and totally wrong. So
well, that's true. We've got form on this.
we have, yeah. So I'll write some notes and kind of keep it in the old tracker and see where we end up.
Well, here's a note for you, and this is a thought that occurs as you chew the thought process is over. In A New Hope, Obi-Wan has clearly been away from action, even at that point, for a chunk of time, and Leia does the infamous "Help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi, you're my only hope" message, which brings him back into the battlefield, if you like. I'm wondering whether or not in Kenobi, the series, there's a moment where, not Leia, because she's too young, but there's a moment where somebody, a Mon Mothma, or a Bail Organa, or a Yoda, puts a message to Obi-Wan that is essentially that shows "Help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi, you're my only hope" moment. Whether there's a call to action, or whether the action is so evident he knows he's got to take action, if that makes sense. I wonder if there's a cue that leads him into it, because as Ewan says, he starts off as, he describes him as broken. He's still not over the events of Order 66, and he does describe him, which of course he should, because he wouldn't want to give anything away if he's talking to Bail, or if he's talking to Yoda, or communing with Qui-Gon. You wouldn't want to give that away. I'm sure that's a brief from Lucas. Don't even give a sliver of information on that. We want that to be the great surprise. But what do you think of that? Do you think and we don't know because we haven't seen it, but do you think he follows his own gut into the scenario, or do you think there's a call to arms?
I think there is, and I wonder if it's somehow the realisation that Anakin Skywalker survived and he's now that black menace Darth Vader. And I wonder if there's that notion of, I need to finish off what I started back on Mustafar.
Yeah.
I wonder if it's something like that. I mean, it's going to be an interesting series just because, from what Deborah Chow's kind of said this week as well, she's really liking this to a character study of Obi-Wan.
Yeah.
So I think we're really going to get into like the nitty gritty, and I hope anyway, really kind of get into the meat and the bones of like what is making Obi-Wan tick in this time era, and just seeing how this all develops, and ultimately, just kind of lead us up to that "Help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi" moment that we get in A New Hope.
Hello, I'm Warwick Davis, and you're listening to Fantha Tracks.
So, Star Wars Fan Fun Day took place in Blackburn back at the start of the month, and we spoke to a whole bunch, a cargo hold full of people, including Sean Crawford. You'll know Sean, he was Yak Face in Return of the Jedi, and I had the chance to chat with him. He doesn't do many interviews because he's not mad keen on them, but I managed to charm him enough to get 5 minutes of wonderful conversation about what he does in fandom and his time on Return of the Jedi. So here's me and Sean talking at Star Wars Fan Fun Day. So we're here at Star Wars Fan Fun Day in Blackburn, and I'm sitting here with Sean Crawford. I'm looking out at the pitch. It's a lovely day, and it's been a good day for Star Wars Fan Fun Day. How's your day been, Sean?
Oh, well, first of all, I was in goalkeeper, and it was a bit lonely. And then I moved up as a centre forward, and I saw a lot of action. I'm stuck inside in the director's box, and it's hell up here.
There's worse places to be.
What a great crowd. It's a full-on Star Wars fantastic day.
It is. We say this, we've been saying this on the show for years, and other podcasts and websites that we've done. Fan Fun Day is one of the best events that we do all year.
I remember it well from the last time I was here. I can't remember, it was like 2013 or something. Long time away. And it's so nice to be back. Same fun crowd.
Yeah. How's life been with you? Have you been keeping busy? I mean, the world's turned upside down the last couple of years. How's things been for you?
Well, it went quiet, obviously, for a few years, but now it's sort of opened up and yaks out and about. I've been to... all the shows. I've been to Las Vegas, and in fact, last weekend I was in Nashville doing a show out there, and where else have I been? Cologne. So it's obviously there's different things you need to travel, but if you do it properly, it works, and it's nice to get out there again.
I mean, you've been doing events for a good few years. Do you still enjoy getting out, chatting to folks? And
what's there not to like? It's fantastic. I'm a collector myself. I'm a fanboy myself. And it's. You get to meet the other actors. Say Anthony Daniels last weekend, and nice. Shane Kenny wasn't here today, but that is nice. You're meeting people as you go along through the years and re-meeting them, and it's a sort of a group. It's what's there not to like? I love it.
How do you find it as we've got new films and new shows coming on and new guests join the circuit? Do you enjoy getting to meet them, getting to know them, sharing a few stories?
In truthfulness, I've lost track with all the new episodes. I really don't know where we are. I mean, I've got Disney Plus at home, and my kids know. They know what's going on. They sort of inform me, but I'm bad on keeping the plot going. But I meet the new characters, new figures. But I mean, to be honest with you, I just love the crowd I've grown up with. Yeah. They're my friends. They're the same age, and it's just nice to see. And also, of course, there's my best buddy Tim Dry. We've known each other 42 years, believe it or not. Yeah. And how nice is it to go around the world with your best mate and have a meal here with him, and this is when I see him, and it's always a jolly, It's good times.
It's got to be a jolly. And do you still enjoy going out representing Yak Face?
Oh man, yeah. Do I love that? I mean, I think I'm known for the swag I do. Yes. I mean, it's a creative output for me, sort of making things go for the yak. I have a whole group of people, the Yaksters, and you join the herd. And I do, the swag. I mean, I did, for instance, in Las Vegas, I did Yak in Vegas. I did a casino chip, and that was very popular. And then it's a carded piece, and then on the back of the cards, the Yak trivia, stories about maybe the how I got the job, or the missing scene, or generally a bit about the figure, why it's so rare and expensive. Yeah. What else? And at Nashville, I did because it's the music city, I did a retro single, RPM 45. Right. And it was a coaster. Yeah. But I did a record sleeve, and it was all. They've all gone. I've been giving them out here. I do. Yeah, I like my swag. Yeah. And other people do. I mean, I've got here on the table. I know this is a pod, but I do all the illustrations. I do a lot of artwork, and here I've done a replication of a 1980s, 82 Dixie cup.
Yeah.
And I've done my one, which I give out. With not only that, a little twist, you get the Dixie cup, and it's got the name being Sean Crawford, you get some Crawford biscuits in it. So you got your coffee cup and biscuits. How about that?
You've got it nailed.
I just love it. It's good.
That's brilliant. Well, thanks for giving us so much of your time. Enjoy the rest of the show.
Thank you very much.
Along with Darth Vader in the Obi-Wan Kenobi series, the main threat, you would say, comes from the Grand Inquisitor. Not played this time by Jason Isaacs, as he did in Star Wars Rebels, but this time around by Rupert Friend, who talked about the character with Entertainment Weekly. One of the interesting things that he said was that he didn't watch any episodes of Rebels because he didn't want his version of the Grand Inquisitor informed by anybody else's performance. What do you make of that? That struck me as quite surprising. He says, I really wanted to honour the character as I saw him, so I almost deliberately did not see the animated interpretation. Myself and Deb Chow and Dave Filoni and all of the guys really wanted to do something fresh that honoured and was faithful to the spirit of the character without doing a kind of impression of anybody else's interpretation. In a shared, unified Star Wars universe where animation and live action are supposed to sit together, what do you make of that?
I mean, when I read that, I just kind of put my hands on my face and I was just like, oh my God. I mean, I tell you one thing, and I know we didn't really talk about the Kenobi trailer in a huge amount of detail, but there's something about the way he just walks in on that shot when he lands on Tatooine, and you've got Reva one side and it's the third brother, the fifth brother, I can't remember, on the other side, and he kind of saunters in. That does not feel like the Grand Inquisitor that we know from Rebels.
Yeah.
He kind of has like a more of a saunter, more of a, I don't know, a relaxed arrogance about it. So I was like, okay, I'd be curious to see how this all works. But yeah, I mean, you have on one hand, you have people like Kathleen Kennedy, you know, speaking on Vanity Fair, talking about like unified kind of like connectiveness and all this mumbo jumbo. Yeah. And then you have other people who are just like, oh, we're not going to reference or look at the stuff that's come before. I mean, clearly when they did Cad Bane for the Book of Boba Fett, that was, you know, they must have studied and looked a lot at the animation, and obviously we had Dave Filoni there to help. So animated characteristics and styles, you know, transposing into like live action kind of thing and look is one thing, but if you're not really kind of matching up to what the character is, it's a little bit worrying, but it's not like, oh my God. I mean, I'm not going to sit there and analyze Rupert Friend's performance and compare it to Jason Isaacs on the first watch through. And I don't necessarily think we need to, because whatever Rupert Friend does could completely blow whatever they've done on the animation completely out of the water. And if that's the case, well, then it doesn't matter. We hopefully have a stronger, more compelling character, and we just have to kind of try and reconcile the two differences in our own headcanon.
Yeah, that's a great way of putting it, because I think there are mixed messages. I mean, going to the Kathleen Kennedy thing, saying, and I'm sure if you spoke to her one-on-one and she was more specific in her words, it wouldn't be quite the same. But if you read it cold, what she said in Vanity Fair, she basically said casting Alden Ehrenreich as Han Solo, and you would imagine by extension Donald Glover as Lando was a mistake, because she's saying only Harrison can play Han Solo, only Harrison can play Indiana Jones. So unless that's a false flag, then you think, well, there's no Solo 2, because they're not. You know, the visual effects to bring Luke back for moments is getting very good, but it's still not there. It's fantastic, but it's still not there. Certainly not enough to sustain it for a whole film. Unless there's been mega leaps with what we've got with Indiana Jones in the fifth indie film, then you've got to think, is that a sustainable thing? And Harrison's not going to be here forever. He's 80 this year, so he's just not going to be around forever. And with this, the character of the Inquisitor was created by Filoni and the Star Wars team, but brought to life by the voice of Jason Isaacs. Personally, I was quite surprised he didn't come back to do a live action version of the character.
Yeah, me too, to be honest. I was slightly disappointed as well. For whatever reason, maybe he wasn't interested. Maybe it was a scheduling conflict with other things that he's doing, because he is quite busy. Whatever it is, I was a little bit bummed, because you think, he could probably have played a really strong version of the Grand Inquisitor. And at least, of course, you know, then have the similar kind of voice to what we heard in Rebels, at least, if nothing else. Maybe he just wasn't too kind of up on the whole like layers of prosthetics, because You know, it's not like it's just a fake artificial nose and a couple of bit of like forehead ridges. That's you know, some serious kind of prosthetics going on. So that's probably, you know, got to be part of a commitment where you've got to buy into when you do a character like this.
Yeah, very true. I mean, and maybe he just wasn't available, or like you say, just not up for it. Rupert Friend says about his character that he was a former temple guard who became the character that he is. Obviously, he's seen a lot, he's learnt a lot. He mentions further in the interview how he's a character that loves the sound of his own voice. So he'll, you know, if he can talk at length about, it's like us doing podcasts. If he can talk at length about something,
maybe
then he will.
Should do a podcast.
Maybe he should, yeah. But also, he one of the phrases, and I used it as the headline of the article. He says, obviously, this is interesting. He's the master of the Force. So he's really building his own character up. But to me, it's that economy of power that demonstrates a truly powerful figure. So he's not Force unleashing himself around the set. You know, he's using his powers judiciously. That's the way it feels. As in, he's not running around like a headless chicken chasing after people left, right, and centre. There are plenty of lower minions who can do that. So he's a boss character. I wonder when we get into it, we'll find out in a few days whether or not he's a character that can stand alongside Darth Vader, obviously subservient to, but alongside Darth Vader as a trusted, powerful character who has the trust of the Emperor, has the trust of Vader, or whether he's a character like Krennic, let's say, in Rogue One, you know, who's got ambitions above his station and gets slapped down when he tries to exert the power that he's got. I'm curious to see what the dynamics will be between the villain characters, or whether we're going to see the Emperor as well.
The fact that he's got that title, Grand Inquisitor, that would kind of suggest that he's definitely got some kind of confidence in the Emperor, at least. Maybe not Vader. That, you know, I mean, I'm just kind of going back to the Star Wars Marvel comics, and, you know, Vader was not really happy with the fact that the Inquisitors were introduced. He uses them to, you know, to a certain level of degree to kind of get what he wants. But ultimately, Vader, you know, or at least in Vader's mind, he is the master of the Force, you know, and, you know, so that makes it an interesting dynamic. So I wonder if there's going to be like a bit of a little bit of a power battle going on between the two, you know, just maybe vying for the Emperor's favour, for example. And I mean, like he does say, you know, he has got minions to worry about, you know, running around and doing stuff, but he can sniff out, or he thinks he can sniff out Jedi. So that means that he's you know, going to be very, very interesting to watch, and just to see how that nose works, I guess.
I love the way you phrase that, because it just takes me back to that Phantom Menace phrase that Yoda says, always two, there are no more, no less. So it's the rule of two, and there's parts of me wonder which of Palpatine and Vader adhere to the rule of two the most. You know, if the Emperor is happy for these other Force users to be out there serving his ends and serving his, you know, instruction, if you like, how does Vader feel about that? Because it feels like Anakin is constantly checked and constantly managed and constantly watched over, and there's always other people to do the jobs. And Anakin's never quite given the leash he probably thinks he should have to do what he said to Padme in the picnic scene in Attack of the Clones about putting the galaxy right. Needs somebody to just make the decisions and do it, you know, and constantly as he's out doing the things that he should be doing for his master, even though we know he's a slave like he was as a kid, as much as an adult in the Vader armor, that there's always somebody like an Inquisitor character, numerous, you know, he's just the Grand Inquisitor, like you just said, there's others below him, and there's been other characters, and even outside of canon. You know, you look to Starkiller and you look to other characters that have come along and almost undermine him. How angry that would make Vader. His anger fuels him. Palpatine knows that. But I'm just curious to see what the dynamic's going to be with these villain characters. Because at this point, Ben and Yoda and the few other Jedi that may have survived, Kanan obviously in this era, Ahsoka, are very much the minority like the Sith were for the previous 1,000 years.
For everything in one location, daily news, reviews, interviews, podcasts, video, and social media feeds, bookmark FanthaTracks.com for Star Wars news 24/7, 365.
So we have promised for the last couple of weeks that we have got some listeners' questions, and the first one that we are going to tackle this week is quite an interesting one. And I think, as Mark alluded to, almost foreshadowed in what he said at the beginning of his podcast, this could lead us down roads long and winding and possibly very, very tenuous. So the question is from James Floyd, and he asks, which Star Wars character would you want as a road trip buddy? And now, Mr. Newbold, you are going on a bit of a trip over to Celebration. So if you didn't have our good friend Paul Naylor and Martin Keeler and Matt Booker and everybody else who's coming with you, who would you want on that road trip?
Oh, as a Star Wars character, who would I want on that road trip? I mean, Han Solo's pretty well travelled, but I would imagine travelling with Solo, you would be chewing your nails down to the knuckle because there's trouble always follows. And similarly with Lando, he's like we've mentioned Solo era Lando earlier, and that's the character, that's the era you think of him as a traveller more than any other. But he gets into trouble as much as Solo in sort of slightly different ways. So whilst those two would be fun, they're probably not the best. I would say as a road trip buddy, because you've got to think who's going to get you from A to B reasonably safely, and who's going to get you from A to B without driving you insane. So you want somebody that's conversational and can tell stories, but you're confident that they're going to manage the trip. I would say probably Obi-Wan. He doesn't like flying. We know that. He's not a happy traveller, but he's quite conversational, as we see with Dex. And he certainly knows his way around the galaxy. He can live quite frugally. You're not going to be spending a fortune. You know, you can see the galaxy on $4 Altarian a day sort of hitchhiker thing. So you're not going to burst the wallet. So I think right now I would say Obi-Wan Kenobi. That's who I would pick right now as my road trip buddy. What about you?
To be fair, that is a really good shout, and I probably would actually agree with you. I think it would kind of depend upon if you wanted to get from A to B and actually get to B. I think now, if you actually had just like no real plans and you're just like, right, we're going to head off in that direction, then people like Lando and Han and actually Dr. Aphra would be fun as hell. Yes. I mean, but you would never get to be not unless you went kind of like on a huge detour and possibly only just barely managed to escape with your life. Obviously, depending on the era in which you are traveling, it would quite be nice to actually travel in a bit of luxury, so you could possibly travel with maybe Her Royal Highness, maybe Princess Leia. I'd imagine that that would be quite a nice way to ride, and actually even if it was in the cockpit, you'd imagine she's probably quite chatty and would have some stories to tell. So I think that would be quite a fun one. And also Rey.
Yeah,
Ray or Poe Dameron, they'd be, again, Poe was probably, he'd probably want to take you on, stop off on a few cantinas on the way and stuff like that. So you might end up losing your ship and that. So I think, you would have to be pretty careful as to who you pick. I think probably the safest option is that if you ever get offered to go anywhere with C-3PO, I think the biggest thing to do is to avoid that like the plague, because we know what happens when 3PO gets behind a speeder. It just goes completely wrong.
What's our second question?
Okay, so our second question comes from Elliot Marsh, and the question is, you're in charge of the next Disney's 3 Star Wars films. What era, what stories, and what characters, and why? So I feel like that's a big old question to chomp on for a bit, Mark. So any ideas?
Oh, well, part of me thinks, and this is very recent. The question was posed a few weeks ago, but there's been information come since then. Kathleen Kennedy, in that big interview, that Variety piece, I think it was, went into a lot of detail about the architecture of Star Wars post Rise of Skywalker, post the Skywalker saga. And I do get what she was saying about Alden Ehrenreich and so on and so forth. But really, I think the crux of what she was saying was about moving beyond the Lucas characters and sort of spreading out into the wider galaxy and seeing more. And also because we've got multiple time periods we can now do Star Wars stories in. We've not gone near the Old Republic. And part of me would love to do that, but also part of me worries that what they'll do is they'll sort of, Knights of the Round Table, sort of stylize it so they look like futuristic knights. And I know that the Dark Horse comic did that to a degree, but that was 30 years ago. So I think, in a galaxy where you can get to the technical level of having hyperspace and lightsabers and blasters and all the other technology that they've got thousands of years ago, I think if you go into the Old Republic, you want to give it a familiar aesthetic, but different. But I think they might go too far down the rabbit hole of trying to make it look like the Holy Grail, but Star Wars.
Almost, well, basically, it's Game of Thrones but in a galaxy far, far away.
Game of Clones, yeah.
Game of Clones. That's a fair point. I think actually what you do is, and I guess maybe it's something that they tried to kind of do a little bit in the sequel trilogy, but I think you set it 400 or 500 years post the Battle of Exegol, and there's a new republic, or a republic that's been set up and is established, and I think the Jedi are there, but maybe they're not called Jedi, but they're familiar as Jedi, but to us as a viewer, but they're not necessarily the Jedi of old. And just kind of do something like that, and perhaps that's when you can have that line about Luke Skywalker was just a myth, not like used in a film that was only set 30 years and the guy's still alive, as such, but set several hundred years. It doesn't need to look, I don't think, aesthetically too much different, because I kind of feel that where we are in the galaxy that we've always really seen from, let's say, the High Republic era onwards, it's almost like the flattening of a technological curve as such. There's obviously technology that kind of does get developed and gets improved over time, but it's like motor cars today. Everybody's pretty much got a car, and that's so like flying and stuff like that is more of a normalized way, so there doesn't need to be any massive like huge kind of like leaps in technology and suddenly everything looks more like a 1970s sci-fi film and everything's pristine white and like the inside of a Tantive. It could actually still feel like Star Wars, just set kind of slightly differently and skew things a little bit. Maybe actually there are more dark side Force users and more light side Force users in general, and actually but the whole kind of democratization of the Force has happened, and Force sensitivity is something that a lot more people have. And then from that, maybe we then end up with an interesting battle or an interesting dynamic between the galaxy, maybe between those who have and those who have not, for example.
That's a great point, because that feels a little bit like at the end of Buffy, for example, when you didn't just have a Slayer, there was loads of Slayers.
Yeah.
The power was distributed amongst others. And there's kind of a groundswell in the fandom of people who want more characters to be Force users, because I guess now you look at it as in it's almost an entitlement to have the Force, whereas it is just what it is. It's not a social thing. It's obviously these children are taken as youngsters to become younglings and Padawans and so on and so forth. So there is a process, but it would be interesting, to get into a galaxy where more people have the Force rather than less. I mean, we've seen Attack of the Clones, and I think if I remember the number, there was like 10,000 Jedi left by the time of Attack of the Clones.
Mm-hmm.
But you go back into the past, to even a couple of hundred years, to the High Republic, and clearly there was far more had the Force, because there's temples and there's outposts and stuff everywhere that kind of fall into disuse by our era. I say our era, OT, prequel, sequel, within that 60-year span. So it's not such a prevalent thing or a prominent thing, or it's not out there like it was. So it would be interesting in the past to see how that was, but also, like you say, pitch it forward a significant half a millennia. It's still the Star Wars galaxy. All the planets are still there.
Yeah.
Maybe Tatooine has become lush and green again like it was in the past. Maybe Coruscant's overgrown like it was in the New Jedi Order era. You know what I mean? There's things you would recognise, familiar things, but with a twist, because goodness knows if you went back 500 years on Earth, it's a very different planet, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, massively different. You need to have that separation to stop yourself tripping over the legacy characters a little bit. Yeah. And, nowadays, I think even, unfortunately, I think what will happen is legacy characters will probably include people like Rey and Finn and Poe to a degree. They'll be like, one bookend of that Skywalker saga legacy. But the kind of things that actually maybe were set in motion in that sequel trilogy, you kind of start to see kind of like have developed quite a bit. For example, Tamiri Black at the end of Last Jedi, breaches his broom, and then suddenly, so suddenly that is the first hint that actually there's more than just Rey and Kylo Ren and Luke and Leia in the galaxy who've got the Force at this point. There's loads of people, they just don't realise it, and then there's people who do things that they just think it's a little bit unnatural, and I mean, I suppose it possibly falls into maybe the category of like Muggles and purebloods and stuff like that, like from Harry Potter, but I'm sure there's ways of doing stuff around that and seeing how we could kind of because I think it'd be to have big force battles on like really big scales. So, what we saw at Attack of the Clones in the Grand Arena was awesome, but it was Jedi versus machines. But let's just have a whacking great battle of Jedi or Force user versus Force user. And also seeing perhaps over that 500 years how different cultures and different planets and different systems have maybe developed the Force culture in their own ways, rather than this kind of harmonized Jedi philosophy. Everybody's doing stuff a little bit differently, and just seeing how that would create an interesting kind of tapestry and texture for Force users. So not everybody's got a lightsaber, somebody's got like a Force whip or something crazy like that, and just seeing how that then all kind of meshes together.
I love that. We'll come back to this. I think without knowing it, Elliot has opened up a very, very nice can of worms there. I think there's loads we can really dig into that. So great question, Elliot, and thank you, James. And we have another one coming up later in the show. But for now, we're going to move on to our Tim Dry interview. We spoke with Tim live at Star Wars Fan Fun Day. He, of course, played Jaquil, Whiphid, in Return of the Jedi. We had the chance to sit down with him at Blackburn, talk about his time in the suit on Return of the Jedi. Fascinating little interview. So here's me and Tim Dry at Star Wars Fan Fun Day talking about his experiences. So we're back at Star Wars Fan Fun Day in Blackburn. Keep wanting to say Burnley, got to stop doing that. And I'm sat here with Tim Dry. I'm looking at a photograph of him as Whiphid from Return of the Jedi.
Yes.
How are you?
I'm very well, thank you.
What an intro.
Yeah, brilliant. What can I say? It's actually Jaquil is my name.
Yes.
And Whiphid is the actual species. So it's like saying rover dog.
Good point.
Yeah.
Good point. That's very true. How's this weekend been? We had the Dinner with the Stars last night, which was great fun.
Yes, that was memorable, I think.
And today I think it's been a cracking day. I've stolen Paul Blake's seat. I feel terrible.
Stand up.
It's been nice and busy, and there's been plenty of folks here. Have you enjoyed it?
Yeah, it's great. For a Sunday, it's such a tart. You can actually cut this bit out if you. No, it's been great fun, and it is a fun fan day, isn't it?
Yeah. And do you enjoy sort of chatting with folks and catching up with people and sharing stories?
Every second of it. No, of course I do. It's great. I live a fairly solitary life at home.
Yeah.
So it's great to meet people, especially people who recognise you did something wonderful 40 years ago.
Yeah.
Well, I say wonderful, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I was part of something wonderful.
Yeah.
And that's something that most people can't really say, So yeah, it's lovely. People want to know, what was it like? How did you do this? How was the costume? How did you get the job? So yeah, it's good to talk about that.
And you're happy reminiscing about this, and as you're chatting to folks about various elements of these things, as brains work, do little memories dredge up that I'd forgotten about that?
No, I've got a pretty clear memory of all of that time, because I had day-to-day diaries, so I could write down, went to Elstree for costume fitting on January the whatever, met Robert Watts, didn't meet George Lucas actually, but no, I pretty much remember all of it.
That's tremendously helpful though, because not everybody keeps a diary, so to have that detail is...
Yeah, I don't mean a diary as in, dear diary, blah, blah, blah. It's just like 8 o'clock did this, 9 o'clock. Also, Sean and I were working every night as Tick and Tock, the robotic dancers. So this was just another job, really, because we left Jedi straight to Belgium to do a live show, down into the recording studio, and then I got the chance to play this monster in a film called Extra, which was a video nasty, which came out in '83, I think. So, things were moving so fast, you didn't really have time to think about, my God, I've just been in the third Star Wars movie. It was like, yeah, I did that.
And how did life turn that you two guys who were working together anyway ended up in the same project?
Sorry, say that again.
How did life work out that the two of you guys working together anyway ended up on that same project? How did that just come to the period?
Well, we both trained in mime, and our teacher was a man called Desmond Jones. Well, still is called Desmond Jones, actually. And he phoned us up one day and said, look, I've been contacted by the producers of the new Star Wars movie. They're looking for mimes to play alien creatures. So I think there were 25 of us who went to his school to audition. And as Robert Watts, the producer, was there, maybe a casting director, and we just did some alien acting. Went home and thought, well, that would be good if, Anyway, a week later, we got another call from Desmond saying he got the job. So the next step was to go to Elstree Studios, to the wardrobe department, and, okay, Tim, try on that costume. Oh, that fits. Okay, you're going to be Toothface.
Right. So no guarantee what character you're going to play. It's just whatever sort of feels right, whatever fits.
Whatever fitted, yeah. So that was good. Oh, okay, I'm a big furry alien with tusks and teeth and stuff, But compared to some of the other creatures, I got off fairly lightly.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And I mean, now it seems crazy to not think that you'd be blown away being in a Star Wars film, but that's such an assumption. Even then, obviously, Star Wars was huge and Empire was huge. You knew you were going into something significant, didn't you?
Yes. I mean, having seen the first two and being completely blown away by them, to suddenly realise I'm actually in another one, it's almost too much. You think, I've got to feed the cat, I've got to take the garbage out or something. It was completely magical, the whole experience.
That's brilliant. That's amazing. And here we are 40 years later talking about it.
Who would have thought?
I know.
Nothing happened, after we did Jedi in 82, we got on with the rest of our lives, and it was only in 2002 when we were contacted by a guy called Graham Miles, who said, I've got some pictures of you, I'd like you to sign them and I'll pay you money. We thought, wow, that's weird. What do you mean pictures of us? Anyway, we met him in a pub in Notting Hill, and he had this whole rucksack full of pictures of us, and we had character names, and we had a whole backstory, and it was like, wow, all this had been going on without our knowledge, and then we were told about conventions. So we did our first convention in 2003, and that kicked off the whole thing. That's how I'm here now.
How fantastic.
Yeah.
What a treat.
It is a treat, yeah.
What a fantastic little chat. Now, let's move back to our listeners' questions. Our third and final one is from our main man, Hassaslam, and he asks, in the unlikely event that Kenobi should fail to appease the viewers, should Disney then turn their attention back to wowing audiences at the cinema, or start making changes at the top in order to right any loss of momentum within their ranks?
It's a tricky one. I think it's very unlikely that Kenobi won't appease a good chunk of the viewership. Although, if you think back to Empire Strikes Back, which is regularly voted in the top 5 greatest movies of all time, not just Star Wars, but greatest movies of all time, and has been for the last sort of 30 years comfortably, and it's 42 years old this week. But if there's enough people who aren't that fussed about Empire, nothing that gets made today is going to appease the whole fandom. That thing does not exist. It can't. It just can't. So I think it's going to appease enough people comfortably to get Star Wars back, in everybody's minds and where it needs to be. I don't think that's going to be an issue unless they've really just put the greatest hits in the trailer and they've completely, pooped the bed, which I don't think they have. That Kathleen Kennedy piece in Variety does say, our thoughts are very much at the moment on the television stuff. Next we thought it would be Rogue Squadron. It turns out next thing's going to be the Taika Waititi project, whatever that is. Presumably you're thinking that's got to start shooting sort of next spring, you'd like to think, it can't be that far away. Otherwise, Star Wars movies, the gap between Rise of Skywalker and the next film will be 6 years. It's a big chunk of time. In relation to changes at the top, I don't know. I mean, it all comes down to what you think Kathleen Kennedy, because I'm assuming that's who Hass is referring to. The top is Kathleen Kennedy, the President Lucasfilm. Depends on what you think her role is. She says a lot of things in the, again, Variety piece. But that being said, she can have anyone outside of George Lucas, and even he was convinced to change things on a fairly regular basis. Anyone can have their opinions and have those opinions changed and tweaked, adjusted, steered in a different way by a persuasive argument, even if it's completely the opposite point of view. Or somebody comes up with a great idea. Lucas wrote largely with a very broad brush You know, he got into detail on certain things, but when you think of, for example, Return of the Jedi, it was sketched fairly broad. I think he knew where he wanted to go.
Yeah.
But there's certain, you know, you read in the conversations with Kasdan and Marquand, for example, especially Marquand, who doesn't get the credit he deserves for coming up with certain ideas on Jedi, that you think, oh, that must have been nailed down in advance. And it's actually in that chewing the fat element where all these little nuggets came out. And I think it depends on where in that creative tree she sits. I see her as a nuts and bolts producer, a make it happen producer, let's give Dave and John the latitude to do what they need to do kind of producer. But she's the top of the tree, she's the name above the door, and she's a woman. So I think a lot of flack goes her way that probably shouldn't. But also she's probably got, well, you don't last this long in Hollywood without having broad shoulders. So, you know, I would imagine a lot of it washes over her. But changes at the top, it depends on how involved Disney are as a whole in what Lucasfilm does. Everyone says Filoni. I don't think Favreau will commit completely to Star Wars because he's just got this prehistoric planet thing coming on Apple TV this week. He's got irons in other fires. So he's a creative powerhouse. But the one thing she does say that's absolutely right is if you get a director or a producer or a writer or whatever coming into Star Wars, they've got to be prepared to commit significant, not months, but years. They've got to dedicate years to making this project come to fruition, and finding those people is very tough. And she did find it with, obviously, Filoni's a company guy, so he's there. But with Favreau, she's found a guy who's been able to dedicate enough time to make it happen. So I don't know about changes, but I do think now TV feels like it's starting to gear up in a good way and get some momentum, but movies definitely need some focus.
I agree, pretty much. I think you're right. The initial concern people have, I think, is that Star Wars has always been a big screen event. And the more we see on streaming, it starts to erode that a little bit. And I think also Star Wars has to evolve and adapt. It can't just be something that just pops up every 5 or 10 years in the cinema. TV and filmmaking and the whole industry has changed dramatically since The Force Awakens has come out. I'd much prefer to see good quality storytelling on the medium that works for it. Whether or not we get any big dramatic crossover between the two, we're only going to see if something really warrants it, I think. And, you know, you look at even Marvel and their streaming shows and that have very little, you know, real kind of impact on directly what happened in the cinematic universe per se. But you are right, going back to the very first point of the question about if it fails to appease fans. I think the moment you end up with a sequel to something, you've already potentially split your audience, 50-50, because they've now got an alternative. And when you've got multiple iterations of a film or a franchise that runs for 40 years, it's, you know, you've suddenly now stretched out your fan base. So original fans who saw A New Hope in 1977 have got completely different tastes. They're in a completely different part of their life now to fans who first fell in love with Star Wars from The Rise of Skywalker or even The Bad Batch. And so, like, they're, you know, and they all have their own preconceived notions of what Star Wars should be and what Star Wars is. And a lot of it is going to be from baggage, from what they've used to expect and what they know. And then a lot of it's going to be just down to what they think should happen. So the longer a franchise goes on, the more diluted the fandom gets. There will be points, and it could be that Kenobi will be one of those points where people unify and kind of rally around it. Pretty much like The Mandalorian. I think, you know, everybody could pretty much say, on the whole, The Mandalorian brought the fan base together after the sequel trilogy. We saw a little bit of fracturing and a little bit of disagreement with the Book of Boba Fett, so we know it's going to be up and down, and that's just going to be the nature of what the fandom is these days. And I guess really it's just going to be down to making the argument and having constructive discourse and conversation rather than just going at people's throats and also finger pointing. I mean, yeah, granted, I think we can now take a step back and look at the sequel trilogy, and if this was a force of government inquiry about as to how the sequel trilogy was kind of like divided devised and how it was run and managed and operated, then I'm sure we could find fault at the top. But again, also when you kind of consider that sequel era trilogy, you also have to then consider the pressure coming down from the top, coming down from Disney onto Lucasfilm to kind of say, hey, we've just brought you now got to make true on the $4.7 billion that we spent on you. And I think that at that time was a big issue. Now I think things are kind of leveled out a little bit, and I think Lucasfilm have kind of proven themselves on Disney Plus. Disney doesn't necessarily need to micromanage it quite so much, at least overtly. So therefore, you know, we can hopefully allow more storytellers like Dave Filoni to kind of flourish and Jon Favreau to be brought in to kind of infuse new interesting stories and new kind of, you know, aesthetics from his kind of experience, same as Taika Waititi. And then hopefully we're going to see something even more exciting at the end of it. Kenobi will be what Kenobi is going to be. And I don't think necessarily, unless they really do something that is so heinously against the character, and I don't know, he goes and sits down with Luke Skywalker on a park bench and they kind of like start feeding the ducks and he tells him everything about like the Clone Wars and stuff and do something completely to break the canon. I don't think there's anything that in Kenobi is going to have such a detrimental effect to everything that we've got. I think this will just be a kind of something that's just going to fill in the blanks and just make everything just feel a little bit more kind of connected between the prequel trilogy and the OT trilogy and maybe even the sequel trilogy. I mean, who knows? I'm sure there's going to be some really clever ways they found to kind of seed something in that might then pay off in the sequel trilogy. Right, okay, well, I think that's all we have time for episode 138. So thank you very much for our 3 listeners' questions. They were really interesting, and I think there's definitely points into each of those questions that we will return to at later dates. If you would like to actually send a listener's question in and you don't know how to do it, then Mark, can you let the good listeners know how they can get in touch?
I certainly can. If you want to be a part of the action and stay updated on all the latest Star Wars news, visit fanthatracks.com or check out the free Panther Tracks app through the App Store to follow us on your mobile device. You can reach out to us and send in your listeners' questions by emailing radio@panthertracks.com. We're now out of listeners' questions, so we need new ones. Obviously, we've got Celebration coming. There'll be news coming from there. We've got episodes of Kenobi landing before the next episode, so there'll be stuff to talk about there. There's comics coming out, all sorts of good stuff. So it's May 25th, Star Wars Day is coming up soon. So anything you want to talk to us about, send them in and we will tackle it. Comment, like and share on any of our social media feeds at Panther Tracks, and be sure to subscribe, leave a review, preferably a 5-star one, on Amazon Music, Audible, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcatcher or smart speaker of choice. And as always, thanks to James Semple for composing the Panther Tracks intro, Adam O'Brien for our making tracks at Omni Music, and Mark Daniel and Vanessa Marshall for our voiceovers. This week just gone, we had an episode of Start Your Engines. Next week we have an episode of Cannon Fodder. So remember, tune in to Good Morning Tatooine, live Sunday evenings, 9 o'clock UK, 4 PM Eastern, 1 PM Pacific, on Facebook and YouTube. And check out those Panther Tracks radio episodes on Fridays at 7 o'clock UK time for those new episodes of The Panther from Down Under, Planet Leia, Desert Planet Discs, Start Your Engines, and Cannon Fodder. We've got a Making Tracks live episode coming up next, later on Making Tracks and Panther Tracks Radio, and that is me done for this episode.
Brilliant. Well, I should let you get cracking with the packing and bugger off to Celebration, you lucky git. Have a fantastic time, and I will catch up with you very soon. But for those who are going to Celebration, or even those who aren't going to Celebration, make sure you check out the Panther Tracks TV YouTube channel, because there's a fantastic chat between Mark and Regal Robot's Tom Spina, as Tom goes through some of the Celebration exclusives that his team have put together. And of course, for those who are actually going to Celebration, have a fantastic time. Make sure you buy me something nice and pretty. We will see you on the other side. So take care, stay safe, enjoy Kenobi whenever you get a chance to watch it, and until next time, may the Force be with you.
Coming up next on Panther Tracks Radio, it's Cannon Fodder.